people who work in the prison system would have another, and I think it's up to people to decide where the truth is.
Give government propaganda and the media spin doctors the flick, and check out Doing Time for news, views and tunes on prison issues from Guantanamo Bay to Christmas Island to prisons and detention centres everywhere. Every Monday at 4 p.m. on your community radio 3CR.
We are still fired up, and we're still talking about revolution.
Welcome to the Doing Time show. We've got a big one tonight.
Indeed we do. And of course, that's Peter, who has just introduced the show, and this is Marissa. It's approximately 4 o'clock, and this is 3CR Community Radio, 855 AM on the dial, streaming live on www.3cr.org.au, and this is the Doing Time show, as Peter said.
Yeah.
So starting off, before we actually go into the intro, I just wanted to draw attention to listeners that it is the death anniversary of the death of Miss Dhu, and this is a young woman that died in custody about 2 years ago, and we're going to be doing some work and interviews and paying tribute to Miss Dhu next Monday, and we'll be speaking with Joseph Pugliese about that. And our thoughts actually today go out to the family on behalf of the Doing Time show. We want to offer refreshed condolences to the family. I indeed spoke to Caroline, who is a relative of the family, and her grief was just like it happened yesterday. And on top of it, they also had a death in the family and weren't able to be interviewed today. It's approximately 4:01. So starting off this afternoon, we're going to be speaking with Brett Collins from Justice Action. And we're going to be speaking with Brett about the rapid build dormitory prisons, which is actually going to be making things worse for prisoners, not better. A lot of overcrowding, a lot of deprivation of programs, and we'll be speaking with Brett shortly about that. After that, we're going to be speaking with Ian from the Refugee Coalition in New South Wales, and we're going to be speaking with him about Hamid Khaazaie. Australia must do more to care for asylum seekers held offshore after an Iranian man died in entirely preventable circumstances, Queensland's state coroner said. Hamid would still be alive if he'd received proper medical care after developing a leg infection at the Australian-run detention centre on Manus Island, according to coroner Terry Ryan. But the 24-year-old died in a Brisbane hospital in September 2014, 2 weeks after seeking help at the centre's medical clinic, which didn't have the right kind of antibiotics to treat his infection. So we're going to be speaking later on with Ian about this, and he's going to be giving an update.
We will not negotiate with minor state of title government or anyone on our culture, on our land. You know, if people say, oh, you're going to finish up with nothing, well then so be it. But at least our hearts will tell us that we did not sell out our country and our culture and heritage for a few scungy dollars.
Subscribe to 3CR so that your dollars support Indigenous voices and the struggle for land justice.
For Aboriginal people, the greatest grief of all is seeing the country destroyed. And somewhere along the line, we have to realise that we don't actually have the right to do that, that nothing we've ever done has given us the right to do that. Now, you know where I stand on this, because I'm so simple-minded. I think we've just got to admit that this is an Aboriginal country. Just do it.
And you're back with the Doing Time show, and it's one of those days I think we have not been able to get onto Brett Collins from Justice Action. He's missing in action, but I thought that while we were waiting for him to call, or while we try to get onto him, rather than playing music at this stage, I thought it would be really, really good to be able to read out an article about Miss Dhu and to honour her, even though we can't interview her. It is the death of the anniversary, isn't it, Peter?
Interview her relatives.
Rather than interviewing her relatives. So, and this particular article was compiled by a number of people some of them being the relatives of Miss Dhu and also Joseph Pugliese, who we're going to be interviewing next week. Joseph is actually a great friend of Ray Jackson's, and they did a lot of work together. And he's collaborated with many organisations, including Esther Sydney, about Aboriginal deaths in custody. And this is actually on a website that actually maps out a lot of deaths in custody, and it's called Deathscapes. And the case study begins as follows. At a lethal intersection, the killing of Miss Dhu, Australia. Miss Dhu was a 22-year-old woman of the Yamati Yanda Nation and the Banjima. Miss Dhu was taken into custody at the South Headland Police lockup under a warrant of commitment for unpaid fines. She died within 44 hours of entering into the custody of Western Australian Police. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander viewers are respectfully advised that this case study may contain images of and references to deceased persons. All viewers are respectfully advised that this study contains images of references to the deaths in custody of Indigenous peoples, black people, and refugees that may cause distress. At the same time, each screen of these case studies testifies to target community strength and courage as they respond to repeated deaths in custody through mirrored creative forms, through lines of solidarity, and through an unwavering call for justice. My granddaughter has been dead for 2 years, and I've still got no answers. I should be waking up every morning and kissing her cheeks, not ironing a T-shirt with her photo on it because she is dead. Auntie Carol Rowe, Miss Dhu's Nana, 2016. A young Yamati woman. Miss Dhu was of the Yamati Wanda Nation family group on her mother's side and the Banjima family group on her father's side. She was born in Port Hedland, though she spent much of her childhood in Geraldton with her Nana, Carol Rowe. Her family describe her as happy-go-lucky and always with a smile on her face. They remember her as caring, full of love and cheer, with a fierce sense of loyalty to friends and family. Miss Dhu was only 22 years old when she was taken into police custody. When police responded to a report that Miss Dhu was being abused by her partner, they unearthed a number of her outstanding fines. This twisted events casting her as an offender against the law rather than a young woman in need of protection from family violence led to her own arrest and shocking death less than 2 days later. Miss Dhu's status as a young Aboriginal woman meant that she was at the centre of a lethal intersection of gender, racial and economic violence. Her experiences of interpersonal masculinist violence at the hands of an abusive partner, her inability to pay minor fines that led to her incarceration, and the racist violence she was subjected to by police and medical institutions both preceding and following her arrest, all contributed to her untimely death. During her final 48 hours of life, Miss Dhu tried to convince police and medical officers that she was seriously ill, but she was discredited, disbelieved and subjected to further physical injury. They repeatedly refused to provide her with due care, respect and the necessities for life. The violent occupation by the colonial prison nation on Yamati country. Stretching fences across stone and sand and far into sea, their magnificent jurisdiction of brutality, they are their own totems. They worship their order. For Miss Dhu, and that was a poem by John Kinsella. A continuum of violence against Aboriginal women. Of the 99 deaths that were investigated into by the Royal Commission into Aboriginal deaths in custody, 11 were of Aboriginal women, the majority of whom died in police custody. 3 of the 11 women, Faith Barnes, Nita Blanket and Christine Leslie Ann Jones, died in Western Australia. Nita Blanket was at Bandiup Women's Prison when she suffered a serious asthma attack. Like Miss Dhu, she was disbelieved and denied life-saving care. 20 years before Miss Dhu's death, Janet Beatson died at Mulawa Women's Prison. She was seriously ill, but was dismissed as withdrawing from drugs. Indigenous women now represent about 34% of the female prison population, despite making up only 2% of the total female population. In WA, the ratio is closer to half. The deaths of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women in custody have been afforded little visibility. One of the points that hasn't been really highlighted is that Aboriginal women have also died in custody. Most of the publicity is centred around young Aboriginal men who have been in custody within a short few hours and have met their death. But there are Aboriginal women who have died in custody, especially in Western Australia. Auntie Helen Uli Corbett, former chairperson of the Committee to Defend Black Rights. The official records rarely desecrate data to consider Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women as a distinct, uniquely positioned group. Inquest reports, media articles and other sources must be cross-examined to determine the number of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women who have died in prison or in police custody or police-related pursuits. Since 1990, we have counted 37 deaths of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women in prison or police custody or police-related pursuits across Australia. More than half of these deaths have been in WA and New South Wales. Pervasive criminalisation. Miss Dhu was the subject of 4 warrants of commitment for fines and costs, totalling $3,622.34. These were accrued between 2009 and 2011 and started with a $200 fine. Based on the largest fine, which could be cut out at $250 per day, Miss Dhu was to serve 4 days in custody. Like many other women who are incarcerated for the non-payment of fines, Miss Dhu had no other realistic means of paying them. Since 2010, 1 in 6 Aboriginal people going to prison in WA has done so for fine default, not including people held in police custody like Miss Dhu. In 2013, 1 in 3 women who entered the prison system did so to clear fines. Miss Dhu's death has prompted policy reviews and renewed debate about law and order politics and the incarceration of people for fine default. Despite recommendations, reports have continued to emerge from WA of other women being similarly targeted, including a mother of 5 whose outstanding fines were paid by a pensioner who felt compelled to intervene, and one of Miss Dhu's cousins who was threatened with warrants of commitment for unpaid fines. Unpaid fines. To lose her life over that is a testament to how deeply ingrained the racism is in the system. Sean Harris, Miss Dhu's uncle. Police discretionary powers as techniques of racial violence. High rates of incarceration and good order offences reflects how the bodies of Aboriginal women and girls are violently regulated and policed in public space. The police treatment of Miss Dhu exemplifies the manner in which police discretionary powers can be mobilised as techniques of racial violence. They evidence the asymmetries of racialised power that inscribe police discretion as to whether or not they will charge someone for disorderly behaviour, as is often the case with Aboriginal people, or whether they choose, as is invariably the case, with white people, to let them off with a caution. Police discretionary powers as techniques of racial violence contribute to the overrepresentation of Indigenous people in Australia's prisons, as they criminalise Indigenous people in ways that often have cascading effects. For example, an Indigenous person who resists arrest may be charged in turn with offensive language and police assault, a combination known as the trifecta. Miss Dhu's fines for disorderly behaviour included swearing at a police officer. However, while in custody, Miss Dhu was sworn at and degraded with no criminal or other consequences. Former Sergeant Bond was asked whether he swore at Miss Dhu. He conceded he may have, because that's the way we spoke to each other in the Pilbara. The police could not see Miss Dhu as a victim who was deserving of protection and assistance. Her Aboriginality denied her this status. Dr. Hannah McGlade. Gendered violence. Around 5 p.m. on the 2nd of August 2014, Miss Dhu was taken into custody under warrants of commitment for unpaid fines with her partner, Dion Ruffin, who was arrested for breaches of a violent restraining order, VRO, against a former partner. Mr. Ruffin was 17 years her senior. He was known to police as a serial domestic violence perpetrator. Miss Dhu's family had long held concerns about her safety and well-being with Ruffin and made repeated attempts to get her away from him. When they arrived at the lockup, Miss Dhu had some difficulty walking when she got out of the police vehicle. When questioned by First Class Constable Eastman, she indicated that she had a broken rib. At this point in time, she was standing next to Mr. Ruffin. The ultimately fatal sepsis that Miss Dhu suffered stemmed from injuries inflicted and re-inflicted by Mr. Ruffin. No efforts were made to ensure that Miss Dhu was spoken to and assessed safely and in private. Miss Dhu was taken to cell 3 and Mr. Ruffin was placed in an adjacent cell. Authorities entrusted with protecting Miss Dhu ignored evidence that she was a victim of severe domestic violence. She said that her man was flogging her and he'd done the broken ribs, the late Miss Dhu's father. Miss Dhu required safety, treatment, care and a timely, serious and effective investigation of the criminal family violence inflicted on her. Instead, the state criminalised her over unpaid fines and effectively legitimised and replicated the violent coercive control that she had been subjected to by her partner. The failure of police to respond to Miss Dhu's disclosures and take seriously cases of family violence against Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women underpins how purveyors of state violence cannot be relied upon to prevent domestic violence. As anti-violence organisations like Insight have advocated, alternative responses to gendered violence that do not promote the violence of the prison industrial complex are required. The submissions of the First Nations Deaths in Custody Watch Committee to the State Coroner highlight the supposed responsibilities of police to investigate domestic violence and the ways in which officers failed to fulfil their obligations to Miss Dhu. Refusal to protect. In 2002, the Gordon Inquiry into the response by government agencies to complaints of family violence and abuse in Aboriginal communities made a series of recommendations that are largely yet to be implemented. In 2015, a report entitled A Measure of Trust considered how WA Police evaluate the effectiveness of its responses to family and domestic violence. Issues raised by victims, survivors included a fear of being disbelieved, blamed or judged, a lack of confidence in the justice system, fear of retaliation and mistrust of the police. Many support services indicated that WA Police consistently failed to take breaches of violent restraining orders seriously. This was borne out in the case of Andrea Pickett, a Noongar woman from Perth who had taken out multiple VROs against her arranged husband. The coroner's episode, A Matter of Life and Death, documents how the failure of authorities to respond effectively to the domestic violence experienced by Andrea Pickett and by the Japanese-Australian woman Saudi Jones contributed to and enabled their murders. It also documents the relentless struggle of Andrea's family to achieve justice and change from her murder. The case of Andrea Pickett. Andrea was murdered by Kenneth Pickett on 12th January 2009 while hiding at her cousin's house. At the time, he was on parole in respect of a charge that on 14th February 2008 he had made a threat to kill her. Prior to her murder, she suffered several violent attacks and multiple breaches of the VRO. She had sought the support of crisis care in the hope of finding a safe place for herself and her children, but was told that they were unable to accommodate her. She relayed her concerns to police, but they were largely sceptical and dismissive. No steps were taken to ensure her safety. We walked out of there and she was like, nah, he's going to kill me. The police, are not going to help me. Diane Andrea Pickett's cousin. Resisting accountability. The case of Lynette Daly. Lynette Daly, also known as Norma, was a 33-year-old mother of 7. She was described by her family as beautiful, loving and kind-hearted. She had survived previous relationships where men had inflicted multiple forms of violence and control against her. On Invasion Day in 2011, she was subject to a prolonged and violent sexual assault at a time where she was highly intoxicated and could not have provided consent. She died the following morning and was found naked and bloodied on the 10-mile beach near Aluka in New South Wales. A report by 4 coroners entitled Callous Disregard detailed the harrowing circumstances surrounding her death. When questioned by police, Adrian Atwater, one of the men charged for her death, stated, These things just happen, man. As I said, girls can be girls, boys will be boys. The New South Wales Director of Public Prosecutions declined to prosecute in 2012 and declined to revive charges in 2014, following the coronial inquest. Community outrage led to an independent review of the case in 2016. A 2-week trial was held in August 2017, following which the judge delivered a guilty verdict. On 8th December 2017, Adrian Atwater was sentenced to 19 years with a non-parole period of 14 years and 3 months while Paul Maurice was sentenced to 9 years with a non-parole period of 6 years and 9 months. She was just a statistics with the DSP and with them. You know, it was just another Indigenous girl. We'll sweep it under the carpet. I was wondering if it would have been 2 Aboriginal boys had done that to a white girl. I reckon they would still be in jail. Gordon Davis, Lynette Daly's stepfather. We know where they are now. We know they won't do it to anyone else. Gordon Davis, Lynette Daly's stepfather, December 2017. And we're nearing the end of the article. Dr. Hannah McGlade, a Noongar human rights lawyer and senior Indigenous research fellow at Curtin University, has long been writing on the violence experienced by Aboriginal women and children and the pervasive culture of silence, inaction and marginalisation of victims, survivors. She has been involved in advocating around Miss Dhu's case. In 2016, she addressed the UN at a panel discussion on the rights of Indigenous peoples at the 23rd Regular Session Human Rights Council. In this address, she referred to the violent deaths of 3 young Aboriginal women, Miss Dhu, Andrea Pickett and Lynette Norma Daly. Aboriginal women were absolutely suffering extreme violence and having no one to go to. The state is part of this problem. Now you can see many very serious offences against a woman with no accountability in the justice system. Dr. Hannah McGlade. Exit to courtyard, a non-diagnosis. On the day that Miss Dhu was taken into custody, she described her rib pain level as being 10 out of 10. While she waited to be taken to the Headland Health Campus, she could be heard constantly moaning and crying. Upon arrival, Nurse Lindsay recorded her pain score as 3 out of 10 and allocated a triage score of 4 to low acuity. Can you help me? It's hurting like hell. Miss Dhu, 2 August 2014. When Miss Dhu was examined, she was groaning in pain and recoiled when Nurse Dunn touched her. The nurse responded with words to the effect, "I didn't touch you, I hardly touched you," and allegedly rolled her eyes. Miss Dhu was immediately treated with suspicion and had her credibility questioned. During the inquest, both Nurse Lindsay and Dr. Lang suggested that an escorting police officer had told that Miss Dhu only appeared to be in distress or pain after she was informed that she would have to spend time in the lockup overnight. Dr. Lang thought she thought Miss Dhu's limp was a little bit artificial, like she was playing up her symptoms. She recorded an impression of behavioural gain and a discharge diagnosis of behaviour issues. The persistent assumptions that Miss Dhu was faking her symptoms and was malingering, addicted, manipulative and hysterical. These entrenched racist stereotypes underpin and license the physical ill treatment of Miss Dhu. Indeed, it is only this framework of racist preconceptions that makes intelligible the inability of medical and custodial staff to recognise that she was seriously ill and to treat her with due care and respect. Savundari Pera, Statements for Miss Dhu. Now, it's approximately 4:26. We've got about 4 minutes before we interview Ian, but I just wanted to alert listeners, I won't be able to finish this article, but if you want to have a look at this very, very relevant website, I'll just give you the website. It's www.deathscapes.org, case studies, Miss Dhu. And there's a lot of other stuff there. And the corresponding author, I'm just having a look. It's peracurtin.ed.au. And special thanks go to Auntie Carol Rowe, Carolyn Lewis and the First Nations Deaths in Custody Watch Committee, Dr. Hannah McGlade and the late Mark Newhouse, who used to be the chairperson of the Deaths in Custody Committee in WA and died of cancer recently. So I just wanted to read that article. We were meant to interview Brett. He's missing in action. It's approximately 4:27. I'm going to try and get onto him maybe for next week. And Peter, I'm wondering perhaps maybe we need to give listeners a bit of a break after that very harrowing anniversary tribute.
Yeah, sure. I've just put on We Shall Cry by the Rumpy Band.
And you're back with the Doing Time show, and we're going to be speaking with Ian, who's from a very, very industrious refugee organisation. Hello, Ian.
Yeah, hi, how are we doing?
Great. Great to have you on the show, Ian. And we've interviewed Ian a few times on this show. Now, Ian, I'm just wondering, just start off quickly, just saying where you're from and who you are.
Yeah, I'm from the Refugee Coalition in Sydney. We're involved in organising a lot of the protests, fighting to change the refugee policy in Australia, obviously, and put an end to offshore detention and mandatory detention. So, pretty active.
Absolutely, and I think we do need to be active in these very, very dreadful times. So Ian, could you just start off telling us, and I gave a brief intro at the beginning about Hamid, and talk about what happened, and I believe that Australia certainly needs to do more to care for asylum seekers held offshore.
Yes, I mean, Hamid's story is really a very shocking story of medical, neglect and quite, deliberate policy that ultimately, saw him die. And there were some shocking mistakes, along the way, but again, all mostly attributable to a policy that meant that the delays were built. He couldn't get a visa when he needed to get a visa to get, urgent medical attention. So it really started with a minor scratch on his leg. He developed septicemia, blood poisoning. He was taken to very sick. He went to the medical clinic on Manus Island itself at the time when it was on the naval base. The truth is that they didn't have the antibiotics to treat him. By the time they recognised that he was deteriorating, that the infection was getting worse, the doctors on Manus actually requested that he be medically evacuated to Australia. Australia denied that. The Border Force in Australia, denied that. It was another 24 hours before finally the permission was given him to be evacuated to Port Moresby. By that time, he was desperately sick. Port Moresby simply didn't have the facilities to be able to treat him. He went into cardiac arrest when he was in Port Moresby and was effectively brain dead when he was finally transferred from Port Moresby to Australia. And about 12 days later, they turned off the life support machine. So he actually, died in the hospital in Brisbane, which is the only reason there was a coronial inquiry compared to the other people who've died offshore who have not been subjected to a coronial inquiry or an inquest. So we had got some findings, we got some information, there were lawyers able to represent the family. So a lot more of, the failures of the system and the scale of the medical neglect which led to the death of this young man was able to be revealed in the coronial report.
So when was the inquest?
With our findings were handed down only today, a week ago, in Brisbane.
That's very interesting. So he died. So Hamid Khaazaie died in 2014, and it took 2 years to hand down these findings.
Yes, I mean, the thing is hideously slow, so it took a long time for the inquest to happen. I think it was 200 years before the inquest actually happened. After the inquest finalised, it's a year since, sort of waiting for the actual findings to be handed down. It is, hideously slow, and in spite of the very damning findings of the coronial inquiry, of course, it's 2018 when they should have been made in 2014. I mean, I really don't think the government's got any intention to act on the findings, and the coroner himself said, if we wanted to guarantee that there would be no more, Hamid Khaazaie cases, then the refugees needed to be brought to somewhere where they could get, the highest standard of, medical care, and that would be in Australia or in a country like Australia and New Zealand. He said, but he recognised, the reality of the government policy and that was unlikely to happen. So he went on to make a number of other recommendations, including the accreditation of medical facilities, on Manus and Nauru to a standard established by Australia. He put the lie to the idea that the medical facilities on Nauru and Manus Island were anything like even what was available in remote areas, and he referred to Cape York, that there was what was available on Manus Island was way below even what you might expect on remote Cape York. So he certainly put the lie to a lot of the government's arguments, as I said, over the time, but they could have been made in 2014, not 2018.
Well, that's exactly right. Well, that's 4 years, actually, not 2 years. 4 years.
That's right. We've been waiting 4 years since his death. It's been 4 years. We finally got the findings. Yes.
So Mr. Ryan is the coroner. Is that correct?
That's right. Yep.
And he actually stated that the health care that Hamid received didn't meet Australian standards.
Yes, very, very emphatically, that they were well below the standards that were even available in remote areas of Australia. And this is compared to what Scott Morrison said at the time. He talked about the outstanding levels of healthcare that were available on Manus Island. Well, the coroner's finding was, very, very explicit that the medical care on Manus and on Nauru is way below, what is acceptable.
Indeed, and in fact, the coroner goes on to say that I am satisfied that if Mr. Khaazie's clinical deterioration was recognised and responded to in a timely way at the Manus Island Clinic, and he was evacuated to Australia within 24 hours of developing severe sepsis, he would have survived.
That's right. The delays, border force delays killed Hamid. That's the bottom line. They didn't have the antibiotics on Manus Island. The doctors on Manus Island requested that he be medevaced to Brisbane, to Australia. That was on the Friday. They repeated that on the Saturday. Ultimately, he wasn't brought to Australia until the Monday, and by that stage, he was brain dead.
That's despicable. And does that happen? That happens often, doesn't it, Ian? He's not the only one.
It happens. No, that's right. It happens too often, and you see very deliberate border force policy. We've had a very close calls. Leaving aside the fact that you've got 12 people, not of all who died because of medical emergencies in one respect, often because of medical neglect and mental health problems that are developed, partly because of that medical neglect, or they haven't got the treatment for those, mental health problems that are created by the detention themselves. But we've seen some very, very close calls where people have had to be urgently evacuated from Nauru to Australia in very, very similar circumstances. So it happens regularly, and it happens for the same reasons, that the decisions are not being taken, and the Border Force does not act on medical recommendations. It acts on its own politically driven, decisions. And that was another point that the coroner made, is that there needs to be a very clear policy written that's in force for the offshore detention centres, which enshrines the fact that the medical decisions, the decisions about emergency medical evacuations, etc., what kind of treatment is necessary, has to be made by doctors, not by, Border Force bureaucrats.
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, because they're not doctors. How can they assess?
No, I mean, it's outrageous. I mean, it wouldn't be acceptable in any other circumstances. The idea that you would have government bureaucrats saying, well, you can get treatment and you can't, or you can get treatment but not now, maybe tomorrow.
Not now.
Maybe next week. Yeah, and that's, we've seen, like a mother and baby, desperately ill, kept on Nauru against medical advice. This is 2 years ago. Both of them, within hours of death, had to be, urgently medevaced from Nauru, to Australia. Why? Because you had Border Force officials refuse to act on, medical information, medical advice, medical recommendation, medical pleadings in some cases, pleas to, Border Force to act on the doctor's recommendation that people be evacuated, but it's against government policy, so they've pushed it to the limit. And in Hamid's case, it resulted in him dying.
So basically, the coroner, in summary, the coroner recommended the Home Affairs Department enforce a new policy that puts the clinical needs of detainees first if they need medical transfers. That's correct. Yep. And he also said that there should be mandatory inquests for asylum seekers who died in offshore centres to keep the government accountable.
Yes. There were two very strong, kind of recommendations, and they went alongside recommendations about the quality of health care, which has to be guaranteed to people who are being held on those islands and imprisoned by the Australian government on those islands. So before he alongside those recommendations about acting on a medical advice He said that, well, the medical facilities, and if they're going to be offshore detention places, they have to be accredited to a level that is equivalent to what would be available in Australia.
It's really interesting. I'm just having a look at some of the other notes that's been published about the inquest through the media, and it's quite interesting. It looks here about how Australia's offshore detention regime was not within the scope of the inquest, but Mr. Ryan said it would be possible to prevent further deaths by relocating asylum seekers to other places such as Australia. But then, Ian, he goes on to say that was unlikely without a radical revision of policies to deal with asylum seekers who try to get to Australia by boat. Let's talk about that quickly.
Yeah, well, he made a very, very strong, point in that regard. And although it is outside the guidelines that he was given to actually look at the offshore detention policy, but as you've gone over, he was very, very explicit. That the only way of guaranteeing that there would not be another Hamid Khaazaie was that if the asylum seekers and refugees were relocated to somewhere where they could get guaranteed first-rate medical care, and that meant Australia or New Zealand. And I think that's the lesson we have to take away. I think the coroner's made a bunch of recommendations. I think the government will ignore them. They know very well the scale of the medical neglect. It is a deliberate part of their policy to maintain these places as punitive regimes. But I think the policy for refugees, so the lesson for refugee supporters needs to be, we have to fight to bring them here. The only way we're going to guarantee that people do get the medical care, that they can get the protection they need, is to ultimately, close Manus and close Nauru and bring everyone who's on those islands to Australia, where they should have been allowed to stay in 2013.
And indeed, today is a couple of days after Miss Dhu died in police custody. She was a young Aboriginal woman who died, and we've just been paying tribute to her on this show. So it's interesting how the two are connected in some ways, isn't it? Even though he was offshore, he was still in Australia's care. And they both, Miss Dhu and Hamid, both died as a result of lack of duty of care.
That's right, and I think that's the point that the coroner was making, that there should be inquests for all those people, whether they die on Manus Island or on Nauru. They are dying in custody. It's custody created by Australia. They are in custody, and they should be investigated, and there should be reports in an inquest under the same guidelines. It is a death in custody. There should be inquests, and there's a very close connection. The point that we've made, elsewhere, when you look at the recent circumstances in that there's been an inquest in the beginnings of an inquest in Sydney into a young Aboriginal man who died at police hands or at the hands of prison guards in Sydney, and while people who are dying in cells in Sydney or dying in camps in Nauru or Manus Island, the ultimate responsibility is the same.
Yes, you're talking about David Dungay, aren't you?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, we'll be interviewing him, continuing that discussion next Monday with Joseph Pugliese, who was at the inquest.
Great.
It's approximately 4:46. Ian, thank you so much for coming onto the show, and hopefully we'll be having you back very soon.
Okay, thanks very much.
Take care of yourself. Bye-bye.
Bye.
And that was Ian from the Refugee Coalition in New South Wales, talking about the atrocious circumstances of the death of an Iranian man.
Hang on a sec.
Sorry. Yeah. Oh, we just had a bit of a technical difficulty there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was, as I was saying, an Iranian man who died on Manus Island and really should have been brought to Australia. Just as a postscript, Amnesty International's Kate Squitz was joined by about a dozen protesters outside the Brisbane Coroner's Court to ask the government to implement Mr Ryan's recommendations. The question here today is the Australian government now going to act on this decision and improve healthcare for refugees and asylum seekers in its custody, whether that's onshore or offshore, she said. and the Home Affairs Department said the findings were under review and expressed condolences to Mr Khaazie's family. However, Barry Fatford from Doctors for Refugees said further deaths were inevitable without urgent intervention. This can and will happen again unless Australia acts urgently to reform the way it delivers healthcare on Nauru and Manus Island, she said. Human Rights Watch Australia Director Elan Pearson said the inquest should be a wake-up call to the government. The solution is to get people off these islands once and for all. It's approximately 4:47, and we wanted to actually provide listeners with extensive coverage about this inquest, and the findings, as Ian said, were handed down a week ago. So that's a current affair that I'm hoping listeners were able to listen to this coverage.
We'll just go to the song, My Spirit is Free by...
Yeah, it's approximately 4:53, so we've got a couple of minutes left. And, yeah, Brett Collins, I don't know what happened with him from Justice Action, but he'll be coming back next week and we'll be interviewing him. And just to give listeners a bit of a rundown of what we're going to be interviewing him on next Monday, we're going to be looking at the outstanding issues that is causing concern with inmates to the point that they are having psychological issues, emotional outbursts, and are just generally depressed. And, in fact, the government actually wants to do some rapid build dormitories, which means that prisoners will actually be subjected to even more overcrowding and not have any space, and they'll all be all together in dormitories with no doors. And the Assistant Commissioner, Luke Grant, made, according to Justice Action reports, which are very, very accurate, made a couple of documentaries describing what he termed as benefits of the rapid-built prisons here at the Hunter and Macquarie. And inmates were sceptical of these documentaries, and most inmates were strongly opposed to the dormitory style of accommodation, and for good reason. Prior to this centre opening, correctional officers requested for volunteers to go to the Hunter Correctional Centre, and when they didn't get the response they hoped for, CSNSW transferred inmates against their will to the Hunter Correctional Centre. And, you know, things have been pretty difficult there. In some rapid build dormitories, including in New Zealand, prisoners have been discriminated against and not being allowed to do educational programs because their literacy score is lower than usual. And really that doesn't happen. And really it's a bit silly, isn't it? Putting a score on literacy when they should be doing something a little bit more productive in order for people to get in. Everybody learns differently. And in some cases, inmates have been moved from a prison facility that was close to family members and transferred 5 hours north, leaving the families emotionally distraught as they can no longer receive regular visits from their families. And also with the phone, there was promises that there was going to be more phone calls, and that didn't happen either. It's approximately 4:55. So that's just to give you a little bit of preliminary material and a bit of a lead up to the interview next Monday. Next Monday we'll also be interviewing Joseph Pugliese, and we'll be doing a continuation of the discussion with Miss Dhu, and you'll have that to look forward to. And, of course, we'll interview Brett Collins from Justice Action. Thank you very much to Ian for participating on our show. We've got about 1 minute left, so it's goodbye from Marissa.
See you, everyone.
And thank you very much. See you every Monday from 4 to 5 for the Dhu and Time Show. Just very quickly, before I go, and I'll introduce this next week, but Joseph was actually part of our memorial show for Ray Jackson in April.
Okay, that's cool.
Thank you very much.
See ya.
Bye-bye.
Bye.